For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It is the end of the week. It's Anything Goes Friday. The second hour of our program today, Congressman Ro Khanna of California is going to drop by for a full hour, taking your calls in a National Progressive Town Hall meeting. But other than that, it's you and me. So, you know, whatever is on your mind, there's a number of things on mine. I'll just touch a couple of quick points. The number one point, I think, is, you know, what I'm ranting about today over at HartmannReport.com. My rant today is, which, you know, typically actually I write these the afternoon before, although sometimes I have, you know, sometimes the morning news changes and I have to, you know, get up at 5 a.m. and write something from scratch. But this news broke after, well, as we were on the air yesterday afternoon. I mentioned it briefly yesterday afternoon, and that is that Brett Kavanaugh, the FBI, opened a tip line, and they received over 4,500 specific tips and allegations of criminal behavior on the part of Brett Kavanaugh, some of it involving sexual assault, some of it involving drunkenness, some of it involving apparently gambling. Really, we don't know. I mean, there are a couple of credible folks who have come forward and told the press that they told the FBI, or they left messages on the tip line, that they had specifics, and they've shared what those specifics are, and they tend to fall into these buckets here. But it all got turned over to Christopher Wray, who was made FBI director by Donald Trump and is still FBI director. And Christopher Wray said, "Oh, look at this, 4,500 credible allegations, 4,500 allegations. Probably, you know, a good number of them were probably just, you know, people saying whatever they were saying. But here's 4,500 of these after they've gone through at least some kind of primary filtering. What do we do with them?" So Christopher Wray said, "Well, let's give them to Donald Trump and let him investigate them." So they passed them off to the White House. Right. I mean, let's just keep in mind what was going on in 2018 when this happened. It was the summer of 2018. November was coming. The Republicans controlled the Senate by one vote, 51 to 49. And the concern was that, you know, the Supreme Court at that point in time was 5-4. With conservatives in the ascendancy. And if any of the Supreme Court justices were to, on the right, if any of the 5 right-wingers were to become incapacitated or whatever, Clarence Thomas is so ethically compromised, the possibility of him having to step down or even being criminally indicted, it just constantly hangs over him. Alito is a fairly old guy. Thomas is an old guy. So basically, their concern was, as they were looking at the election of 2018, and a very real possibility of losing the Senate in that election, this was the midterm election, that if they lost the Senate in November, and then, you know, a few weeks later, Clarence Thomas kicks off or gets indicted or something, then they might be blocked for 2 years and getting, just like they blocked Merrick Garland, they, you know, the Democrats in the Senate would block them until Joe Biden becomes president, and then there would be a liberal on the court, and then the court would be 5-4 liberals, and it could reverse Citizens United. And it could reverse Shelby County, you know, Citizens United, which said that corporations are people and money is, billionaires' money is free speech. It could reverse Shelby County, the decision where Chief Justice Roberts said, oh, there's no more racism in America. Just look at the White House. There's a black man there. There's not, you know, we don't need to do, you know, we don't need to stop states from suppressing the black vote. Are you kidding? So, you know, a 5-4 liberal Supreme Court, which was entirely possible, could have reversed that. A 5-4 liberal Supreme Court could have said, you know, abortion rights that were defined in Roe v. Wade, we're going to double down on that and say, you know, this is solid. It's going to stay that way for a generation. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of areas. Voting rights, you know, as I mentioned with Shelby County, they could double down on that. There was so much that could be done, so much of the damage ever since the court took this hard right turn in 1972 with the appointment of Lewis Powell on the court. There's so much damage that has been done to America by the Supreme Court since that time that could have been reversed. And so they were like, oh my God, we got to do something. And then on top of that, you had Anthony Kennedy on the court. He was one of the 5 conservatives. He was a Reagan appointee. In fact, he was appointed to replace Lewis Powell, ironically. But Kennedy voted with the liberals on abortion, on civil rights, on affirmative action, on gay marriage. I mean, Kennedy was this huge disappointment to the conservatives. And Kennedy's son, Justin, just happened to work at Deutsche Bank in the division that had given over $1 billion in loans to Donald Trump. At the same time that the bank was being investigated for laundering hundreds of billions or tens of billions of dollars of Russian mafia and Russian oligarch money. So the question, why did Kennedy resign? Just in time for a summer session of the United States Senate in 2018 so that the Republicans could jam Brett Kavanaugh on the court. And then when it comes out that the guy's got, you know, somehow when he was making $60,000 a year working in the Bush White House, co-authoring torture memos, it is alleged, the White House withheld all of his paperwork from when he worked in the Bush White House. So we have no idea, really. But, you know, how is it that when he was making $60,000 a year in the White House, that he bought a $1.2 million house with a $240,000 down payment and sent 2 of his kids to $10,500 a year private schools and paid $94,000 to join a country club when he had, you know, $30,000 worth of credit card debt that seems to be related to gambling expenses? What's going on here? And that was back in 2006 when he first got put on the federal bench. And then, you know, in 2018, it's like, okay, now he's got now he's up to $200,000 in gambling debts on his credit cards. We still can't figure out how he's paying for his house, although he was making more money as a federal judge then, but still, you know, not what he would make on the Supreme Court. And somebody just pays it off. What's going on? And now we find out that the whole Trump White House and Christopher Wray and the FBI said, you know, no need to investigate Brett Kavanaugh. They never even interviewed Christine Blasey Ford. They never interviewed Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, you know, when you get a security clearance, they interview you. Oh, no, we don't need to talk to him. He's good. So first you get Gorsuch, who took Merrick Garland's seat. That should have been a liberal seat. That would have flipped the court to the, well, actually it would have, yeah, it could have flipped the court to the left. And that's arguably why McConnell was so, because it was replacing Antonin Scalia. And then you get, so Gorsuch has this big asterisk next to his name because Obama actually appointed somebody. And then we get Kavanaugh. And then again, and then of course, as Trump is leaving office, the rush to put Amy Coney Barrett on the court. And again, no serious vetting, no serious examination, no serious what's going on. Congress needs to get to the bottom of this. Sheldon Whitehouse is all over this. The senator from Rhode Island, he is seriously upset about this and is calling it out. God bless him. But, we need to unpack this court. Will it happen? I don't know. I am hopeful. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday. I'm going to pick up your calls right after this break. 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anything Goes Friday. And just a reminder, if you want to talk to Congressman Ro Khanna, he will be with us for the entire second hour, and then we'll be back with you and me. We'll pick up your calls right after this. And welcome back. Patricia in Marysville, in Marysville or Flint?
It's actually Casco Township, Michigan. It's just outside Richmond, Michigan.
Ah, okay, Casco Township. I know where that is. So what's up, Patricia?
Okay, I got a 34-year-old pregnant daughter who is very concerned. She's got a boyfriend that's like an against this vaccine. I'm trying to convince her to get vaxxed, but there's nothing I can find about, is this going to be safe and effective for pregnant women? Is she going to lose this baby? She miscarried a baby last year. That's why I'm worried.
Yeah. Patricia, she needs to talk to her physician. I can't give you medical advice. My understanding from what I read in the news, and this is not medical advice, but what I read in the news is that they are routinely inoculating pregnant women right now all over the country. That there's no exception for pregnancy. There is no, in fact, there are no exceptions, outside of people who have had in the past severe allergic responses to vaccines. There are no warnings about don't get this vaccine if, Everybody over 12 years old is being told get vaccinated, whether you're pregnant or not, whether you're sick or not.
I'll have to bring that up to her again.
Yeah. Good luck, Patricia.
I'm going to need it.
Yeah. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for the call. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I got a real quick one for you and then a suggestion. Mm-hmm. The quick one is the Supreme Court's actually easy to fix. All we have to do is Congress simply says, the Supreme Court, you have to follow all rules and regulations all the federal justices have to follow.
Yes,
Thomas would be gone.
That would get Thomas out of there overnight. You're absolutely right, and Congress has the power to do that. They can right now. The federal court code of ethics, the code of ethics for the federal judiciary, has an exception. It does not apply to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court,
and it would be a three-line. Well, it might be a little more complicated than that, but it would basically just be a few sentences in a very simple piece of legislation to say that all of the ethics requirements and rules that apply to regular federal judges also apply to Supreme Court justices, and that should be at the top. That's great, Paul. I'm totally with you, and that should be at the top of the legislative agenda for Pelosi and Schumer.
I think so. And then I have a suggestion. It's time that we start thinking about a tough solution. It's time to quarantine all unvaccinated adults. They have to stay home.
It is starting to, the unvaccinated shaming is happening in a big way. I mean, I don't know if you've caught this morning.
I live in California.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm seeing my governor hesitate on doing the decisive action that he did to save us the last time because of this recall.
Yeah, no, I get that, and that's happening all over the country, and that's happening at the federal level too. There's all this hesitation, but what is happening is that the word is spreading. 99.5% of all the deaths are unvaccinated people. 97% of all the people in the hospital are unvaccinated.
Here in California, it's 20% of vaccinated people are going to the hospital in Los Angeles and stuff. That's why they issued that mandate.
That is not
That's
true.
what I just read.
Yeah,
I just read that today.
No, 20% of vaccinated people are not ending up in the hospital, Paul. I guarantee you.
20% in Los Angeles. I read that today.
Yeah, well, I don't know where you read it, but it can't be true. It just can't be. You may have 20% testing positive, but that doesn't mean that they're sick or that they're in the hospital. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com. And, of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at ThomHartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at ThomHartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Haley in Austin, Texas. Hey, Haley, you are on the air. What's up?
Hi. I wanted to follow up on your rant from the other day linking crime and poverty. Mm-hmm. You hit so many nails on the head, but there's one area that a lot of people are overlooking, and that's with sexual offenses. I worked in a clinic for about 1.5 years up in Rhode Island that provided therapy to people both on probation and on trial for sexual crimes, and there were several problematic patterns that I noticed. I will add the caveat that a lot of people were correctly convicted. But one of the things I saw a lot. So let's say, you're a poor family and you have a TV or a movie that you love so much, but you can't afford cable, you can't afford a streaming service. What do? You end up turning to bootleg copies. And what we saw, I can't say a lot, but pretty often was they end up going to the internet and downloading bootleg copies of, let's say, Pirates of the Caribbean, and it ended up being child pornography. Well, now they're in charge for a sexual offense, and when you're too poor to afford a lawyer to defend you against that, you're in the registry. And yeah.
So you're saying that people were getting swept up in these child porn stings or
right.
operations and things unfairly, and it was because they were poor. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
right.
I'm guessing poor people get swept up in all kinds of stuff all the time,
yeah,
and
exactly.
just don't have the means to defend themselves, so that's.
And then it's especially problematic. I mean, if you have a felony of any sense, it's kind of game over. But especially when it's a sexual offense and you end up in the registry, there's so many extra steps and hoops you have to jump through.
Yeah.
And so it's really problematic. And then the other thing, again, I can't say it happened too often, but I saw it more than once with people when you're too poor to afford a new computer or a phone, because that's $300, $400, or $500. That's really
mm-hmm.
expensive. You end up buying it off a third party, and you can't, when you're buying a phone off of someone or a computer, you can't tell what files they had on it. And again, it ended up these people would buy a phone and it had child pornography on it. Huh. You're in the same problem.
Totally weird. Haley,
yeah.
Thank you. Haley's point, illustrates this larger issue that, in theory in the United States, if you're poor and you're accused of a crime, you have access to an attorney. In practice, it doesn't actually work that way as well as it should. Kevin in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kevin, thanks for listening to KNYP. What's up?
Hi, I'm calling today about what I think of as wildfire politics. In the western states, California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, and Utah, there are fire cameras on mountaintops. There's an application called alertwildfire.org that you can go to and see what the fire cameras are looking at. And Oregon has 11 cameras for the entire state. And here in Sonoma County, we've got twice that many. And we have at least hundreds, maybe over 1,000 cameras in California. And I think the people in those other western states should call their local legislators and get them to put up more fire cameras.
Yeah.
They're useful. If you get evacuated, you're sitting in your motel room, you can look on your laptop and see what's going on in your neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm looking at the website right now. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Alertwildfire.org.
Right. And I usually use that beta site. At the top, you can click on it. It says beta.
Yeah.
So
it does say, though, that the connection's not secure. They need to get a security certificate on this thing.
Okay.
But
it's done by University of Oregon, University of Nevada at Reno, and UC San Diego.
yeah, you would think that they would have, enough computer sophistication there to figure out that they, it's $100 a year, to put a security certificate on a website. But excellent point. So what's the political part of this you want to talk about, Kevin?
Well, I think people should contact their local legislators. That's why we've got so many here. It's because our county supervisors and state legislators care enough to get these fire cameras up.
Well, I think there's also, back to the previous caller, there's a relationship between this and money. In California, you have a much higher population density within the forests of California. There are more people who live in vulnerable places and larger communities in California in the middle of the woods. Towns, 10,000 people, 5,000 people, 60,000 people, like Paradise. They got wiped out. There's not so much of that here in Oregon. The bootleg fire is 400,000 acres, and it's only taken out 1,500 homes. There are parts of Oregon that are just like wild. And so if you've got areas where you've got a fair number of people, if that 400,000 acres where the bootleg fire is had, 5 or 6 towns of 20 to 50,000 people each, there would be enough lobbying power and enough local money and enough, municipal budgets that they would be doing what you're doing in California, which is lobbying to get these fire cameras up. But there isn't. You can't. 1,500 people are not going to be enough to financially fund that kind of thing. So again, it gets back to resources. This is something that should be the responsibility of the Federal Forest Service. These
sounds
are mostly
like infrastructure to me.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you, Kevin. But I'm, as you pointed out, this is being driven politically from the bottom up, from the local level up, and it really needs to be driven from the top down as well, from the federal government. Kevin, thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls right after this. Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, a liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries' PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day, there's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies, 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. David in Pittsburgh. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I have a theory I've been thinking about for a long time. It's kind of like a three-legged stool. One, we need to regulate the banking and insurance industry. Stop talking about it, regulate it. The other thing is Medicare for all. We need to pass Medicare for all. The third leg is we need to legalize all illegal drugs in this country and tax them, have the government tax them like they do the alcohol and tobacco industry. And this is the major cause of the big city problems with the violence that are going on. Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they're all fighting for that industry of dark money and illegal drugs. And that's my theory. And I'd like to get a feedback from you on that.
Number one, if you're going to try to regulate the banking and insurance industries, you are going up against, hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying and lobbyist efforts. The same thing, basically the same thing with any kind of regulation of anything. And with regard to drugs, when the government it taxes something, they're basically also endorsing it. And
right.
I'm of two minds on this. We have a serious problem in this country with tobacco. We are still losing about 400,000 people every year from using tobaccos. So this is a drug that we have legalized and that we tax, and therefore it's available in stores all over the country. And it's killing about 500,000 Americans every single year. I'm guessing that if we were to legalize the psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, those kind of drugs, if we were to, and sell them and tax them, that it wouldn't kill anything close to that. However, I think that if we were to legalize heroin or methamphetamine or cocaine, you probably would start seeing really high levels of addiction. And I mean, these are serious drugs. And just look at what happened when the Sackler family with Purdue Pharma just decided to promote them through doctors. It became like one of the 10 leading causes of death in a lot of states. So what I'm in favor of, David, is what we've done here in Oregon and what Portugal did, which is you decriminalize all drugs, possession of small quantities. So use is no longer a crime, but you criminalize the sale of it or the possession of large quantities, commercial-sized quantities of the drugs that are more dangerous.
You're not going to cure the problem, though.
I get that, and as long as there is poverty, there is going to be black market activity. There's going to be underground market activity, and it's going to be activity where people are buying and selling things that people want that are not, generally available. Whether it's drugs, whether it's stolen goods, whether it's guns, you're going to have that. I think that the way to deal with the drug problem is to turn it into a medical problem, which is what, like I said, what we've done in Oregon, what Portugal has done. And the way that you deal with the underground economy, essentially, in poor neighborhoods and in big cities, is by reviving them, is by reviving those communities, bringing our factories back from China and Mexico, putting our cities back together. There were not big drug problems back 40, 50 years ago when people could make serious money and working at GM. It was not the case.
It's not going to work because you got the NAFTA agreement that was signed 30 years ago, and it just ruined.
Well, I mean, we're engaging to a certain extent here in fantasy, David. If you think we're going to regulate the banks and the insurance industry overnight, and then we're going to decriminalize and legalize drugs. So in that hypothetical world, in that fantasy world, that's how I would do it. But David, thank you for the call. It's thoughtful stuff. Ron in Chicago. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, right after his $5.5 billion with the B space flight, he told the reporters that I want to take and thank all the Amazon employees who paid for this. Yes, all the non-union minimum wage workers who helped me make over $250 million a day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was a pretty shocking. He said there were two things that Bezos said that caused me to think that this is one of those guys who has surrounded himself with yes men. He lives in a bubble where everybody tells him how wonderful he is all the time, and every idea he has is brilliant. And the first was thanking his workers for propelling him into outer space. I guarantee you, none of them, or very few of them, had any say in that. And number two is he said, why don't we move all our polluting industries into outer space? Right. This is not world-class intelligence. It's just not world-class intelligence. Ron, thank you for the call. Warren in Sturgis, Kentucky. Hey, Warren, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to correct you. Every time you talk about evangelicals, you keep confusing them with fundamentalists, and they're actually totally different things. Fundamentalism is actually a 20th century invention, and it's basically identity theft is what it is. The term evangelical actually started with the Protestant Reformation back in the 16th century. It's what the Protestants called themselves. Right.
Go ahead.
And it comes from the Latin word evangelia, which means the gospel in Latin.
I didn't know that.
They were trying to give, but that's what they call themselves. And basically, fundamentalism is actually a war on the traditional Protestant. Protestantism.
Typically, when I'm referring to evangelicals, I'm referring to the white evangelical church, to people who call themselves evangelicals, and the Jerry Falwells of the world, the Franklin Grahams of the world, and I think many of those people are also fundamentalists. Would that not be accurate?
Well, they're actually what they're doing is they're engaging in identity theft.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, they're trying to take over that term for themselves.
Well, in the process, then they're destroying it, because exactly. Increasingly Americans, in their minds anyway, are conflating the white evangelical church with the Klan. I mean, with white supremacy and racism.
Yeah, that is true.
And
in fact, fundamentalism actually was created by Lyman and Milton Stewart. They founded Unical, big oil people, and because because of the what was called the Federal Council of Churches, which started back then, which was a black and white social gospel movement, much like succeeded by the National Council of Churches.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's what fundamentalism was meant to destroy.
Yeah,
they did not like this unity.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you can track that back to who was the Lord High Protector of England, Cromwell. I mean, you could, and that was just how it got played out in England. Obviously a lot came out of the Protestant Reformation around that time. I was fascinated. Louise and I binge watched The Tudors. Tudors, the Henry VIII and his family, the Henry VII that preceded him, and Bloody Mary who followed him, his daughter. And it was fascinating because it all takes place with the backdrop of the Protestant Reformation going on in Germany and spreading across Europe, and all this anti-Catholic sentiment and the corruption of the Catholic Church. It's absolutely fascinating. Warren, thank you for the call. Interesting stuff. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
First of all, I just want to announce there's a Medicare for All march nationwide tomorrow. People need to go to that. San Francisco, all the major cities.
Website for this?
I believe so. That's going to go on Facebook. I've announced it before.
Okay.
I've already just also announced that I need to donate. I just gave 27 to Nina Turner, so anyway, but I was just talk about, how our two parties are so incestual. We just increased our Pentagon budget by $25 billion. And Tim Kaine, who was Hillary's fellow loser, he was on that committee. A lot of senators from the Democrats signed on to that.
Yeah.
That would end homelessness right now in our country.
The defense industry is really burrowed in, and they have and they've followed a brilliant strategy of building a defense plant in every single congressional district in the United States, and all 435 of them. And therefore, every member of the House has a local defense contractor that can lobby them and that employs people in their district, and of course every state for all 100 senators. The result of that is that the defense industry is largely bulletproof, and what they want they get, and from both parties. And I agree with you, Jeff. It's a crisis. It is draining resources out of the United States that could be used to actually improve the quality of our lives. We have over 700 military bases around the world, and we really need to have a serious conversation in this country. This is my op-ed from 3 days ago. About whether or not we're going to continue to be an empire or whether we're going to do like England did after World War I.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The UK after World War I basically said, okay, that's it. We're not an empire anymore. We're going to fix our own country. And they did. And they put together the National Health Care Service. And welcome back. Vic in Stockton, California. Hey, Vic, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I'd like to get your thoughts about the topic of voting against your own self-interest. I'll take your comments off the air. So here's my quick rant and question. As a Democratic Socialist, it really pains me to say that, it's not just the Republicans and corporations that are making American life difficult and dysfunctional for most Americans. It's also the voting public itself. How the heck did two of the most evil Republican congressmen, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, get reelected? Why did over 80% of voters in Appalachia, of all places, vote for Trump? Don't you think it's time for the Democratic Party to do a forensic analysis of why their messaging isn't working among very gullible citizen voters? Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I'm with you, Vic. The Democratic Party's messaging has been a disaster for years. That's why I wrote Cracking the Code back in 2008. Just in time for that election, saying, here, Democrats, here's some strategies, here are techniques. This is stuff right out of psychology and out of the advertising industry, both fields that I have worked in, and this is how you do it. And some Democratic politicians used that book and used that information, but the party and others largely ignored it, and it's much to their detriment. So yeah, I'm with you, Vic. Thank you, Bruce in Petaluma, California. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I thank you for your wisdom. You impress me so much every day I watch you.
Thank you.
The thing I'd like to mention is we should relabel billionaires as tax avoider, indebted to us guy, whatever your name is, instead of any kind of a laudable hero guy.
The adjective that I've been using is morbidly. The morbidly rich, because we're all familiar with the application of that word to obesity, and what it means is it has reached the point where it's actually causing damage. And
it's a disease.
Yeah, exactly. It's a disease process,
yeah.
and I think that anybody in this country who's worth over $1 billion, in my opinion, is morbidly rich.
Yeah, what do they need all that money for? They can't possibly use it. And it gets, what I look at wealth as dammed up money in lakes that are not accessible to the public.
That's exactly right.
So these guys have all this wealth, never gets into the economy. So our economy, they brag about how rich we are in this country. No, we're not. There's 20 guys with all the money, and they're not spending it. They're not using it. It's just sitting in holding somewhere. and it's never dribbles down into the use. So it's useless. Really, it's turned into garbage. Really.
No, you're absolutely right. And what happens with I think we've got about 800 billionaires in the United States, and then there's around 10 to 15,000 families that are worth more than $100 million, and then you've got a couple 100,000 families that are worth more than $10 million. That most of that money, particularly with the people who are worth more than 100 million or more than $1 billion. Most of that money is not actually circulating in the economy anymore,
it's ridiculous.
The international estimates are that something like $7 trillion is hidden in offshore tax shelters and in ways that doesn't benefit anybody except dynastic wealth. So these people are accumulating enough money that for 5 generations nobody in their family is going to have to work, and it's all we're doing is creating generation after generation after generation of Paris Hiltons. Not to trash Paris Hilton, but
they're
really?
using it against us.
Yeah.
They're using that wealth against the American people.
You can make that argument, and in fact, the ones who are funding political activity, particularly on the right, in my opinion, are doing that. Bruce, thank you for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back in just 1 minute. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Jay in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Jay, what's up?
Last week you were asking why did the Republicans back off dissing vaccines. Mm-hmm. And already today you mentioned the power of the Pentagon lobby and the bankster lobby, but it seems to me you're forgetting the power of the healthcare lobby. They probably gave the Republican Party its marching orders and part of the Democrat Party as well.
There is no such thing as a Democrat Party.
We're not making any money off of COVID-19. It's incredibly hard to collect a padded bill if a patient dies.
Yeah, Jay, I not in my wildest dreams do I think that hospital administrators and physicians and pharmaceutical companies, who, by the way, had nothing to offer when it comes to COVID-19, were whispering in the ears of Republicans saying, you know, you really need to encourage people to go back to work, even if it means getting infected, because we've all got to, you know, make sure that, Donald Trump gets reelected or something.
No, I'm saying that you asked why did the Republican Party reverse its stand and start to not forbid vaccines.
I think it's because they figured out about 2 weeks ago, you know, the epidemiology. They realized that what's going to happen, and it's happening right in front of us right now. But you know, some of the people in the Republican Party figured this out just a couple of weeks ago, that the red states and the red counties are going to get slammed with this disease, and unvaccinated people are going to take the blame for it, and unvaccinated people are going to turn into the smokers of our era. You know, the way that smokers are socially ostracized, smokers are kind of looked down on, so smokers are literally physically segregated from the rest of us. That's how people who are unvaccinated are very soon are going to be perceived. and the Republican Party figured out that they didn't want to be in that bowl with those folks. So that's my opinion anyway. I get yours, but I respectfully disagree. Mike in Center, North Dakota. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. 3 subjects on the infrastructure bill. There's 3 lines in there. One of them, are you familiar with Chuy Garcia out of Illinois?
I know who he is.
Okay. He wants to raise the liability from common trucking up from $1 million in liability insurance to 5, while we're sitting here with the big company, investor-owned companies like Swift in England, and then we're self-insured. I'm just starting up another business after 40-some years because of the cutthroat tactics in this industry.
You're talking the trucking industry.
The only way I'm doing this is building a truck from ground up on wages, so I don't have a payment. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm making here is it's already going to double my insurance before I even put my foot on the gas.
Have you called his office?
It doesn't seem like I'm not an Illinois resident. Do they even accept calls from out of state?
Most legislators do. There are some who won't, typically the high-profile ones. I would try to reach out to his office, and
well,
say,
we have an organization called the Owner Operators Independent Drivers Association trying to lobby on this, and it just ain't working. Yeah. The American Trucking Association seems to be in the forefront of either pushing it or shoving it around. Let me get on to a second subject here. Are you familiar with the public-private partnership part of this?
Part of what?
The infrastructure bill.
Not at any kind of granular level. I know that there's a lot of talk about that, and I know that in particular with the so-called bipartisan legislation, there's a lot more of that than there is in the one that the Democrats are putting together themselves, because that's the kind of thing that Republicans are down with.
We think that a fuel tax is probably going to be about the most straightforward thing to do, and there's a lot of people against my opinion on this. If you've dealt with toll roads in a Class 8 semi-truck, which is, your 80,000-pound vehicles, I'll give you a for instance. To go from the eastern side of Ohio into, say, Camden, New Jersey, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you ready? Mm-hmm. Is over $275 in fees.
Whoa.
For one vehicle. Yeah, now we're talking. I worked on the Beltway up there in Colorado around Denver years ago, running a belly dump at night. And I got on that highway. I think it was like $1.25 to go from the south end to the east end. When it first opened, it was $8.25 for a semi-truck. Mm-hmm. And we pay an astronomical amount of taxes as it is. The truck I drive presently right now, a little over 100,000 miles a year, generates over $30,000 in road taxes.
Wow.
So
on the other hand, you're also stressing the roads a lot more than your average 3,000-pound car.
True. Then build the roads correctly, and then we don't have that issue, do we?
Well, I think anytime you're running something over a road, you're going to have, at the very least, erosion
of the road surface. And there's a lot
of
cars out there that can stress a road. It all depends on, the type of.
No, I'm not defending
I actually
Mike.
I work in road construction.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I'm totally behind anything that's going to help independent operators and small trucking companies. And I really think if you think that Chuy Garcia or anybody else's legislation is going to hurt you guys, every single one of you needs to be calling every single one of those legislators and letting them know what you think. And not just calling them, emailing them, tweeting them, Facebooking them, just let them know. You can be a lobbyist too. Mike, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. Of the other lofty concepts.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is California Congressman Ro Khanna. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. And Congressman Khanna will be with us for the hour. We're going to do a progressive town hall, national progressive town hall meeting here, and he will be picking up your calls. Congressman, welcome back to the program. What's on the top of your mind here to kick off this hour? Anything in particular you want us to know about or be attending to?
Well, Tom, thank you. I did a live stream this week with Senator Sanders, and we were just discussing the reconciliation bill, how transformative it will be. I mean, we have universal coverage for preschool, child care, fully funded community college, expansion of Medicare with dental, vision, hearing aids covered, bold climate crisis provisions to have a massive investment in electric vehicles, renewables, and have a clean energy standard. And that's just the start of it, paid family leave. So we need to get out there what all is in that reconciliation bill and how important it is for the progressive movement to get that across the finish line.
Yeah, Bernie called into the show yesterday afternoon and laid out much of that. It sounds great. Do you think that it's going to get past Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema?
I do. Well, you know how you've known Senator Sanders a long time. Usually he can, it depends on his mood. Sometimes he wants a conversation 5 minutes, 15 minutes. This was scheduled, our live stream, for 15 minutes, and he kept going and going and going because he wanted to talk about the bill, and I'm sure he was equally excited with you. I do think it will get across as long as we mobilize as a progressive community and say, this has to be the bill. It's already a compromise. I mean, we started at $6 trillion. This is the compromise. This is what Senator Schumer agreed to. And we ought not to be focused so much on this bipartisan deal where the goalposts, the Republicans keep moving the goalposts, and focus on really delivering for the American people.
So if I may, the so-called bipartisan bill, it looks like most of the what you might call hard infrastructure, the roads and things like that, have been shifted over into this bipartisan bill that's being negotiated with the Republicans. And it sure looks to me like they are doing exactly what they did with Obamacare, where they just basically strung Obama along for a whole year and dragged it out and got all kinds of concessions, and then in the end, not a single one of them voted for it. And it looks like it's that same bad faith thing. So if that is the case, if my suspicion turns out to be the case, is there going to be a way to add that hard infrastructure into this reconciliation package, or do you get another reconciliation package, or what do you do if or when the other billion roughly fails because the Republicans are just playing you guys, playing rope-a-dope with you?
You're absolutely right, and it will be added. That was the agreement that Senator Schumer, Senator Sanders came up with. It would be added. Obviously, it would be tweaked in some ways. For example, one of the things the bipartisan bill does is they don't want fiber to rural. They are fine with having copper wires because you've got telecom saying they don't want to upgrade everything to fiber. So it will be, the money will be included but improved in a reconciliation bill. But obviously that part has to be included. And you're absolutely right about the rope-a-dope. I mean, what is a deal if you don't have the pay-fors? And if the Republicans are going to reject the low-hanging fruit of a pay-for, which was let's just have the rich pay the taxes they owe, not even raising their rates, just pay the tax you actually owe, and they're not even willing to do the enforcement. I'm not sure how they're going to get any pay-fors if your starting line is we're not going to enforce the code and we don't want to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah, they've been playing this game for well over a decade, and they've gotten very good at it. And it's the whole Lucy football part of it just makes me insane that at least the Democratic leadership in the Senate keeps falling for it. But what can you do? Anyhow, you want to pick up some phone calls here?
That would be great.
Okay, let's do it. Maria in Nogales, Arkansas. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. It's Nogales, Arizona.
Oh, Arizona. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a border town, as you know, and we've suffered economic damage beyond repair. Our downtown, once lively and active, has turned into a ghost town. As a result, there are few to no job opportunities for our community. To add fuel to the fire, Doug Ducey took out the extra $300 in unemployment benefits, and now people have to survive on $200 a week. And I'm one of those people.
Ouch. So what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
This is the question. I think this is unfair and unlawful. Do you think Arizonans should have access? Do you think Arizonans should have a case? Do you think Arizonans have a case against Doug Ducey not granting us our federally granted monies? If so, what can we do as citizens to fight against this class warfare?
Great question.
Thank you. Thank you for that eloquent statement. Thank you for hanging in there. I know it's hard times, and appreciate your resilience. You're absolutely right to be appalled. I mean, the Congress, we passed these benefits because we knew people like you who had been out of the workforce needed help. Now, I've not met a single person who's out of a job who doesn't want to get back into the workforce. The challenge is that it's not easy. It's not easy when you've been out, when you've had a whole pandemic, when you've had a shutdown, when you now have the rise of the Delta variant, unpredictability, and that's why Congress said we were going to give an additional $300 a week to every American. We didn't say, oh, we only want to do it for the blue states. We said we're going to do it for the states that voted for Donald Trump as well. And for governors, for political reasons, to deprive you of benefits that the Congress has approved is outrageous. And I don't know the law well enough in this area to know whether you have a legal case. You certainly have a moral case. But it's an interesting idea about litigating this if a governor denying citizens of their state what Congress has offered.
Nancy in Woodland, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I just had a question. Is there something Congress can do to make Medicare Advantage programs stop calling themselves Medicare? Because their ads and everything are very misleading, and they make themselves sound like they're part of Medicare, and they're not. And as I understand it, it's actually detrimental to the original real Medicare.
Nancy, I appreciate the question. I don't think a show goes by on this that we don't get a question about Medicare Advantage and the problems with it. And usually people realize the Medicare Advantage problems when they actually get sick. It's fine until you have, unfortunately, a catastrophic illness, and then you realize all the things it doesn't cover. Whether you call it something else, I definitely think you need to have far more disclosure and far more auditing because right now they're getting away with a lot with a totally unregulated place and a lot of abuse because of that.
Norm in Tampa, Florida. You're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi, Representative Ro Khanna. This is Norm again. I'm a pharmacist, dentist. I write the blog called You'reWithinTheNorms.com. And, sir, I just last week went to the CDC has done a tremendous job in terms of the vaccine. But, sir, there's a part of the CDC that really needs to be shut down, and that's the portion that deals with the opioid guidelines. And these guys, I went to a conference yesterday with the CDC, and sir, our group came back. We've never seen such an incompetence in terms of these guidelines that are poorly designed, and they want to update them. People are committing suicide because they're unable to get the Medicaid. People with chronic, intractable pain, sickle cell anemia. Unfortunately, these guidelines never included these kind of people, the people that had these suffer from these type of diseases, and now they're classified as drug dealers and dope addicts. And we want to know, as person sits on that oversight committee, sir, and you can see this on our, that we need hearings investigate. I call every time you're on, try to get in and call every time you're on here. But, sir, we need some action here because people are dying and committing suicide. And the CDC opioid work group is not paying attention. And these people came in begging for these guidelines to be changed. And this is a job of the FDA, not of the CDC opioid work task force. We want to know, sir, when are you going to do something about it? And read the blog, youarewithinthenorms.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your passion. I remember your call, and, you know, Tom has followed up with me on this issue because there's so many listeners of this program that raise it. I agree with you that the balance has gone too far in the other direction, and I have raised this with Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney for the oversight. I also will look into seeing if we can do at least a letter with colleagues to the CDC and see if we can get some greater accountability and balance.
It is an issue. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California, taking your calls for the hour in our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. Back with more of your calls for Representative Khanna right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a Progressive National Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna here on Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. And welcome back. Hugh in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Hugh, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks, Representative, for taking the call. And I had a question about your H.R. 3775, the bill for that will help expand health care reform by giving waivers to states, and just how that's going to help us have a national or perhaps a state-by-state meaningful health care reform program. As you might be aware, in 59 cities, tomorrow is going to be a march for Medicare for all across this country to help enlighten people of the current status of how dysfunctional our current healthcare arrangement, dare say, system is. And can you just explain to the public briefly how your bill, H.R. 3775, is going to help pave the way, perhaps in a state-by-state method, like the Canadians did in Saskatchewan in 1947?
Well, I was going to say that you're obviously very well informed on the issue. What our bill does is allow states to use their Medicare, Medicaid funding in order to do a single-payer system. The challenge that Vermont ran into when they tried to do this is they weren't allowed to use a lot of the federal money, and it's impossible to cover everyone if you're not allowed to use some of the federal money. So what we say is as long as you're covering everyone, you're going to universal care, as long as the standard is at least as high as Medicare and Medicaid, you can use that federal money to have a single-payer system so you don't have multiple networks. And we believe this will allow states to succeed in doing a single payer. I hope our state, California, the state I am from, will take a lead. If we can have a big state like California do it or a couple states do it, then just like Saskatchewan, you can see other states adopting it and putting pressure for finally getting Medicare for all.
Larry in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I recently had a conversation with Tom regarding COVID-19 vaccine lottery. And soon after we had that conversation, several states actually implemented a lottery for getting more shots into people's arms. And last week, I think one of the networks stated that it was those lotteries have caused an increase in 40% more shots into people's arms. My question is, shouldn't the federal government start a lottery? And I'm talking about a really big lottery and something that could end on Super Bowl Sunday, where we'll get a lot of publicity and it'll reach all of the red states and get more shots into people's arms so we can get rid of this virus in America. And then we take on the world doing the same thing later on.
Larry, it's a good idea. Obviously, we're correct in predicting it for the states, and I'm happy to look into it for the federal government. We need all the creative ideas we can get to get more people vaccinated. That's our biggest challenge right now.
Congressman, we have 20 seconds. What can the federal government do other than publicizing how bad the situation is with the Delta variant to encourage more of these people in these red states to get vaccinated?
I think we just have to continue to tell people that we're not out of the woods. We have this dangerous combination of people thinking we're past the pandemic. At the same time, the Delta variant is spreading rapidly. Our kids are still unvaccinated. And we need as many stakeholders doing it. I mean, if Sean Hannity finally saying maybe that the vaccines are worthwhile, we need to embrace anyone who's going to give that message.
Yeah, step by step. Thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us. His website, khanna.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, ThomHartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, a National Progressive Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Mike in Bailey, Colorado, you are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hello, Representative Ro Khanna. Hey, the whole issue about converting to electric cars, we're kind of hamstrung in that direction. When you look at what the industry itself is looking for to make them a viable product, is the price. They're looking for a price range in the $30,000 range as an average. Then you've got the charge distance and rate at a charging station, which right now I think Tesla's in the 250-mile range. But when you look at the charge rate, it takes a half hour for the speedy type of charging unit to charge them up to what they're calling 100%, which ends up actually being around 85%. And then what are these people going to do for a half hour while it's charging at a roadside charge station on a highway? The last thing is the cost for the charging units for a commercial charge station is astronomical. Why aren't we also trying to get the petroleum industry to push for a hydrogen conversion of our internal combustion engine auto industry? We've got literally a couple 100,000 certified mechanics that could be converting collector cars, for instance, to run off of hydrogen.
I got it,
and we do have
Mike,
safe
let's
technology
let
for
Congressman Khanna answer your question.
Mike, I appreciate that. I'm open to looking at hydrogen. I don't think that we ought to have just one path. I do think that the issues you raised with electric vehicles are challenges, but as we get more sophisticated research and development on batteries, including fully lithium-ion batteries, and a lot of that development on that. I think you're going to have batteries that last longer, that cars that don't need to be charged as often, and the cost of these EVs will come down. But that said, we should do that plus look at hydrogen, and we need an all of the above approach to the climate crisis.
Don in Maplewood, Minnesota, you are on the air with Representative Khanna. Don? In St. Paul? No Don. Okay, let's...
Hello?
Yeah, okay,
Hello?
Don, you're on the air.
I wanted to bring to your attention, since you're of my age vintage, that Trump is remarkably similar to a character called Captain Queeg in Caine Mutiny, in which he always finds everyone around him disloyal as he rolls the metal balls in his hand during the trial.
So, Don, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
Do you think Trump is mentally unbalanced and incapable of being a rational human being?
Well, Don, psychiatry is beyond my knowledge. What I will say is, whatever Donald Trump is, he has done tremendous damage to American democracy, and I'm less concerned with his personal well-being than what he has done for our public well-being. And he has violated every norm. He has violated laws. He has diminished our standing around the world. And I guess my concern is, how did 45% of the American public go along with that, and how does he still retain such support?
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds. Donald Trump, it turns out, we learned yesterday evening, has raised $75 million this year. It's going into what's called a leadership PAC. And he can basically use that money however he wants. In fact, he's using it for travel and living expenses and meals and stuff like that, rather than to save the republic. Is Congress giving any consideration to changing the rules around these PACs?
Yes, there needs to be, first of all, I think they shouldn't exist. I don't have a leadership PAC or don't take any PAC money. I mean, I think they're subject to abuse, but we need to certainly have far more oversight and making sure that they're not being used for personal expense or expenses that are outrageous. I mean, these are often raised by people giving $5, $10, $15. And they need to be, you have to be accountable for those donors, just like you're accountable to shareholders if a company raises money.
There you go. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Representative Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing California's 17th in the U.S. House, is taking your calls for the hour at a Progressive National Town Hall meeting. Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, entitled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at HartmannReport.com and are podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California in the U.S. House, is on the line taking your calls for the hour in our Progressive National Town Hall meeting. And Dale in Harmony, North Carolina, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I would like to know how a farmer would go about getting justice whenever lawyers say that our case is, they smelt cover-up on it, and FBI does not investigate anything in agriculture unless USDA invites them into it. And I've turned the most information in the Food and Drug Administration on this they've ever seen. And this all relates to the poison of our dairy cattle. And we hadn't been able to get justice on it. And district attorneys has said that this is a case where politicians would have to dance before anything would be done.
Dale, are you saying that your cattle are being poisoned by a product that you're buying that should be regulated by the federal government?
Oh, yeah. It should have been regulated, but it was only passed and approved with short-term studies to help the wet milling industry dispose of toxic byproduct back into animal feed there. And doctors and researchers and all said they'd like to help us, but they fear retaliation from this. That's the reason our case was dropped by the lawyers there.
Let's get Congressman Khanna's thoughts on this.
Well, Dale, it sounds awful what has happened to you. If you write to our office, we can put you in touch with your own congressperson, and I think you have to get your congressperson involved so that they can inquire with USDA and with law enforcement what is happening. And if you were sold a product that ended up killing cattle or having a devastating impact on your livestock, and if that was unregulated, then that's something that the federal government needs to act on.
Catherine in Santa Cruz, California. You're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm here. Wow. Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Just asking briefly, what are the obstacles to Canadian-style healthcare being implemented in California or in the nation? What are the biggest ones?
Well, Catherine, we discussed this earlier, where Canada provides a model with Saskatchewan when they had single payer, and then it was adopted across the country. We can do the same thing here in the States, a state-by-state approach. But the obstacles are the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the hospital associations. I mean, there's a lot of money in private health care.
Tim in Matawan, Michigan. Hey, Tim, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Ro. Everybody out there has got a cordless drill. Why don't they make batteries exchangeable on cars, and they wouldn't have to deal with it? And don't tell me that they couldn't do it because they're too big, because they do it with shipping containers. I'll take my answer off the air.
I mean, if there is a way to do it, and if it makes sense, I'm all for that. I mean, in general, I back something called the right of repair, which means that you should be able to fix these products from companies. Right now, companies don't allow a lot of the products to be replaced or repaired. But I agree with you that to the extent we can have interchangeable parts, that's better than having proprietary parts in many cases. And if the technology allows that, I think we should explore it.
David in Las Vegas, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Yes, Representative Khanna, should we be concerned about, say some faction in the Capitol Police coaching up the people testifying early next week in the Capital 6 investigation, in order to delegitimize the investigation?
David, I think that would be a very foolish thing for anyone to do, to try to coach a witness. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be vigilant, but given the national scrutiny that this has, given the priority that this is going to be, I would hope that the Capitol Police, anyone would have more sense than to perjure themselves or to try to obstruct justice.
Kathy in Valparaiso, Indiana, you are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. Representative, do you have any information or any insight into when travel might be open for British citizens to come to the United States?
Kathy, I don't know. We have a friend whose mother was visiting from the UK, had to come through some other route, came legally, and was asking the same question just about a week ago. And I think it's all dependent on the Delta variant. I mean, unfortunately, some of the modeling I've seen shows that we may have a peak in October or early November. And if that's the case, we still have a long haul in this country. So I don't think we're going to see many of the restrictions start to ease while Europe and while the United States are dealing with these new variants.
Norma in Montgomery, Alabama, you are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi, guys. I just heard the guy talk about battery packs, and so I thought I'd let everybody know. I watched a documentary on Link on China in which taxis drive into what looks like a car wash. A robot comes up under the car, removes this very skinny, large battery pack off to the side. Another robot comes in, sticks another skinny, expansive battery pack under the side of the car, and they drive off, and they pay for it just like you'd pay for gas. And that's all it takes.
Wow.
No, fascinating.
Yes, we don't have that here.
What is the documentary called? Or, I mean, I agree. But look, this is why we have to have massive investments in innovation, in a new battery technology, and figuring out how we lead. I mean, China, as you know, leads the electric vehicle market. It's not even close. And when you look at what the European Union is doing, which is putting an import tax on carbon emissions, our competitiveness depends on us figuring this out. Otherwise, we're going to be shut out of all these international markets if we don't figure out how to lower our carbon emissions. So it's not just about the climate crisis. It's about being able to compete in a global world under these new norms that places like the European Union are adopting.
Eric in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna and Tom. This is regarding a caller in the previous hour that mentioned something about the Democratic Party's need to do a forensic analysis on how they communicate our values to get people to vote, or to get more people onto the Democratic Party. But I think that the forensic analysis is really unnecessary because Bernie Sanders twice had the message, and he was prevented from proceeding into the nomination of president. So I don't think we need to do a forensic analysis, and more so getting the Democratic Party to align itself more into a true populist message. Well, what are your thoughts about this?
Mark, I'm obviously biased. I co-chaired Senator Sanders' campaign and supported him in both of his presidential runs. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Senator Sanders is a very simple message, and that is that we have to help ordinary working-class, middle-class Americans. We have to make sure that they have health care and education. We have to tackle an environment, that the government needs to be working for people, not for wealthy interests. And he's willing to fight for that and to be bold about that in a way that appeals to people's emotions, and people trust him, that he's going to actually be there to help their lives. And I think if we have that kind of bold message as a party, that is not just morally right, but it's the politics that resonate. It speaks to people directly feeling that government can matter in their lives.
Yeah, I think Bernie carried West Virginia in the last primary by something like 25, 30 points?
Huge amount, and his his message cuts across race, religion, class. I mean, it's something that is that is inclusive. Doesn't mean that he overlooks race or gender, but that he understands that we have to speak to everyone's basic needs, which aren't being met.
Yeah, amen. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Representative Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour in our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Will, in Garberville, California, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hello, Congressman. I'm concerned about the Global Coalition for Digital Safety, which is being put forward by the World Economic Forum, and it's a combination of government and big tech monitoring the internet and removing harmful content, including harmful opinions. To me, this is totalitarianism, and I see all of our rights and freedoms being taken away with this, along with the central bank digital currency that is coming forward. Do you have anything to say about the Global Coalition for Digital Safety or the central bank digital currency?
I'm not familiar with them per se, but I agree with you that you shouldn't have big tech determining what expressions are allowed on digital platforms and engaged in private censorship. And obviously, if there's speech that's inciting violence, speech that's inciting harm to the public health, it's one thing that those things should be removed. But if it's just an ideological viewpoint, then I don't want Mark Zuckerberg or Dorsey determining the boundaries of what is acceptable discourse. So I share your concern about that.
Hi, David, in San Francisco. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Congressman. Regarding the infrastructure bill, I'm wondering, the red states are starting to figure out that the vaccines might be a smart idea, but many of the red states are so rural that they've got to drive 50 miles or 150 miles to get to the nearest hospital. I'm wondering if we could get the red state congressman to continue to put in bids into the infrastructure bill calling for public clinics. And, whether you think the congressmen of these states, of course, they should be putting in bids for each of their own districts. And the way the right-wing radio is portraying the infrastructure bill, they're pretending that the infrastructure bill is all very top-down instead of each congressional district putting in bids for what infrastructure needs to be put together for their districts. So I'm just wondering if there's some way that we could goose these red state congressmen to put in for clinics into their area.
David, it's a very reasonable suggestion. We can start by having the Congress people say that you should take the vaccine. We don't have even consensus on that. But after that, absolutely, we should have them put in programmatic requests and expedite and approve any request that's genuinely going to help us achieve the vaccine goal. I believe the Speaker would be more than willing to do that. The Congress would be more than willing to do that. What we need is for these Republican members of Congress to make those requests.
We have 20 seconds. Do you think that that the Republican Party at this point is capable of going beyond partisanship?
It hasn't looked that way. I think now where it's really a matter of life and death, and you've had recently, I think even the Alabama governor saying he doesn't know what more he can do. He said that people should be taking vaccines. I think the reality is hitting them. And look, this is their communities. These are Americans, and hopefully on this issue they will put politics aside.
Yeah, I hope so too. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, our National Town Hall, Progressive Town Hall meeting. You can check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since, since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. Representative Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. You are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Representative Khanna and Tom, on these electric vehicles, have they made any plans on discarding the spent batteries? I mean, even with the hybrids, you know, all these lithium batteries. What do they do once they're spent?
David, I don't know the answer to that. I don't want to speculate. I'm going to ask my staff to do research and make sure that we have an answer. And if you follow up with us, I'm happy to give you one.
David in Columbus, Ohio. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna. Thanks for listening to WGRN.
Hi, Congressman. You're doing a great job. You had a bill proposed to reduce or eliminate the spending on that new intercontinental ballistic missile. I just wondered how that went, and I contacted my representatives on that and asked them to vote and co-sponsor it. Also, there's a proposal to reduce defense spending by 10%. Is that still pending?
David, I appreciate you raising both. I'm doing this with Ed Markey. We don't need to have new ICBMs. First of all, the ICBMs are the biggest risk of accidental nuclear war, because if you have a airplane delivering a nuclear weapon or a ship or a submarine, you can call them back. Once you launch an ICBM, you can't call it back. Secondly, they're actually the most strategically vulnerable. You can take out the ICBM in a way you can't submarines or the Air Force. So anyone who's really studied this, like Bill Perry says, you don't need to build new ICBMs. I mean, it's one thing to just maintain the current ones, and this is billions of dollars that we should not be spending. And so we have to build more consensus in Congress. Garamendi and Markey and a few others are doing good work on it, and we're trying to build, and we're trying to cut some of the defense, yes, on the 10%, because a lot of that goes to defense contractors. This is non-military benefits, non-military families. I think I read somewhere that $20 million is the average CEO compensation at the top defense contractors, and $5 million is the average compensation of executives at defense firms. I mean, it's outrageous.
David in Woodland Hills, California. You're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Thank you. Congressman, America loves to war. We have always been at war somewhere. It is time for America to officially declare war on global warming.
David, I agree with you that we have to have that kind of war-like mobilization to deal with the climate crisis, and we're seeing the impacts of it in terms of the wildfires in my state, in terms of flooding, in terms of the droughts because of heat and dryness. But we're also seeing it in terms of the international competition. The rest of the world is saying we're going to create standards, we're going to tax manufacturers that have too high emissions, and we don't want to lose export markets around the world by not being competitive.
Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. You are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Yes, sirs. Thank you very much. And God bless both of you. It is a pernicious philosophy that proclaims freedom of choice or free speech or democracy while then attempting to be lawful about resistance to corporate tyranny. And I just don't know why. Why? Is it McConnell? Why? Prohibition on the cannabis plant has not been lifted. Would you say it's some secret behind the doors thing that you got with China, who was using the plant as industry many, many, many years ago?
Congressman?
Bob, I obviously agree with you. I think we made good progress on this issue when you have Senator Schumer now saying that we need to have the legalization of marijuana. I'm confident we're going to get there. It's long overdue. It also is needed so we can have safe banking so that you can actually have these industries emerge, and we need to make sure that the industries are diverse and equitable. But this is something that's time is coming, and I'm very, very hopeful we'll get it done in this administration.
Jeff in Portland, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good day, Tom and Representative Khanna. Thank you both for all you do. Representative Khanna, as you move to get the reconciliation and infrastructure bills across the finish line, in my opinion, Democrats can't continue with this laissez-faire approach to voting rights in the For the People Act, which really should be regarded as rebuilding our democracy infrastructure. Walter Bragman in the Daily Poster has a piece titled "The Decade's Biggest Political Deadline," and he's citing August 16th as that date. That's when the 2020 census data will be released. And he argues without the For the People Act passed by then, the Republicans will start gerrymandering like crazy in a way that will lock in a GOP House majority for the next decade. Your thoughts, Congressman? And is President Biden doing enough to end the filibuster? Should we be calling the White House? Thank you, Congressman.
Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, look, the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, has not said that citizen commissions and independent redistrict is unconstitutional. All they've said is Congress needs to act. I mean, they basically, in these court decisions, have said, Congress, act. If you want to have a fix to gerrymandering, we need to have this fix. So it's not just the voting rights. Obviously, we need to protect voting rights, protect people from being removed from the rolls, make sure polling places are put equitably in black and brown communities. But it's also this independent redistricting that is critical for our democracy. And we should have a lot of pressure, in my view, to get rid of the filibuster, at least when it comes to saving our democracy.
It seems like that's the number one issue in front of us.
It really is, in terms of the structural reform of our democracy, because we're not going to get the big progressive goals if you have a minority of interests controlling government.
Right, who represent 41 million fewer Americans than do the Democrats in the Senate. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Always enjoy it. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, and it's great having you with us. We all appreciate it, too. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. It's Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls on whatever may be on your mind. Chris in Erskine Lakes, is that Erskine Lakes or Newark, New Jersey, Chris?
In the Newark area. I'm
Okay.
actually on the road, but I'm from Jersey. So good to
what's
talk
up?
to you again, Tom. It's been a long time. I'm the owner of EV Charging Installers of America. We've been around since 2016, so I'm very familiar with the industry. And I just wanted to follow up on one of the callers' questions before about what happens with the batteries after they are spent, because it's a very common question that we get. And what's happening is an entirely new industry is being created in battery recycling and repurposing. And there are several companies out there that are focused on it. There's a couple plants being built out in Nevada near Tesla. And the thing to consider about EVs, the batteries are quite large. So even if they start to lose a bunch of their charge over time, there's still a very large battery pack that will be able to be repurposed or recycled. And the repurposing, you know, some places are doing it now where they'll take the batteries out of wrecked vehicles and put them into a packaging and basically make it batteries that you can put in your home or business as well. So, you know, there is a lot of different industries being created through EVs. Very excited about the idea of vehicle-to-grid technology, where you're going to be able to feed back to the grid through your cars, and people will actually be able to get paid for that kind of stuff once it really starts to become mainstream.
They started doing that in, you know, it was like 10 years ago. We were it was Denmark. We were in Denmark. We did the show for a week on Danish radio, and they had just passed a law or regulation or whatever, and they were doing it in Copenhagen, as I recall, where people would plug. They were promoting electric cars, and you would plug your car in at night at home, and you would charge, and you'd buy your electricity for, say, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And then during the day, you drive to work, and you plug your car into the charging station, and this is when there's more demand for batteries, and you would actually discharge your car into the network, and they would pay you like 7 cents an hour for the electricity. You set the car so it doesn't go down below a half a charge or whatever you need to drive home, so you're not, you know, running out of electricity. And the idea was to build a fleet of cars for the city that would serve as storage capacity, you know, for peak demand times with regard to electricity, because they had just, you know, put all these windmills into Copenhagen Harbor, and they were solarizing houses like, you know, nobody's business. And I don't know if, you know, if that actually got underway. They were just, you know, they just put it into place when we were there. We had a guy on, you know, one of the, I don't recall if he was with the city or with the country, but, you know, talking about it on the program. Do you know anything about anything like that, Chris?
I don't about over there. I know a little bit that there's been pilot programs with the Nissan Leaf in Europe. But what I could say is happening in the United States right now, and what is going to be a big driver of all of this, are going to be school buses, because school buses, you know, they drive for a couple hours, they sit for a while, and then they drive again for a couple hours, and they're going to be able to have massive battery packs on them. So what's going to happen here is you're going to start getting cities that are going to be changing their buses to electric. And that's where I think vehicle and grid in the United States is going to start to become really big. Now, Ford announced their F-150 Lightning recently, and one of the things they're touting about that is you can feed your house in the event of a power outage, which is really just a stepping stone to being able to use that back into the grid.
Yeah.
And what we have in the United States right now is something called demand response, where facilities like manufacturing plants during times of peak demand will shut down non-essential loads in their building. One of the first instincts for a building is, well, I'd rather not shut off power, I'd rather use a generator. EPA regulations don't allow them to do that unless they have a low emission generator, which not many places do. But when you start now taking into consideration battery storage and the fact that the more cars that come onto the grid, you're going to have a massive storage grid created, that really opens the window for facilities and individuals to start to participate in demand response through actually backfeeding the grid. So I'm really excited about the aspect of grid security and stabilization, because I think a lot of people think, there's going to be a big burden on the grid, which I think is going to happen at first. But once you start realizing the power, no pun intended, of bi-directional vehicles and power, that's where things are really going to start to change, and I'm really excited about that industry. And one of the things I try to do is really try to get conservatives to understand, hey, put solar panels on your house and drive an electric car. How much more self-sustainable can you get? Right. And then you're not subject to manipulation in energy prices through all the different kinds of aspects of manipulation.
Right. And there's also this concern about how much we're loading the grid if everybody buys an electric car. But, the house that Louise and I live in, for example, was built in 1979, 1980. Back then, and the house probably has 20 or 30 light bulbs in it. And back then, typical light bulbs were 60 to 100 watts. Well, over the years, all of those light bulbs have been replaced with bulbs that are 3, 5, 7 watts, the LED bulbs. And so when I plug my car in now, to my house, I still think that I'm consuming less electricity. I'm less than a burden on the grid than when the house was originally built, simply because we've changed the way that we light things. And so I'm skeptical about these claims that if everybody goes to an electric car, it's going to brown out the grid. Because, I think that most houses these days, at least for those people who put in LED lights, are probably consuming, a fraction of the electricity that they're designed for, and certainly that they were consuming 30, 40 years ago.
I agree with you. I think the one challenge, and this is where the idea of smart chargers that can communicate with each other and the grid are going to start to come into effect, because when utilities plan their transformers that are on the pole, especially in urban areas, they're figuring that there's a block of houses. These houses are never really going to be using a lot of power at the same time, and there is going to be an element of EVs, especially if people are out and about and then they get home and they're plugging in the evening at home. There are going to be some elements of it that there is going to have to be some changes made. But I think a lot of it is going to come through the communication and smart devices, and there's a lot of companies that are already focusing on that.
The same way.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's the same way. If you have a smart thermostat right now, I don't know, about your state in New Jersey, Chris, but here in Oregon, they give you a $25 discount. I don't recall if it's annual or monthly or whatever it is, but if you allow them to basically control your thermostat during a time of crisis, when there's a peak load, they'll and it's fine with me. It seems to make sense. Chris, I got to move along, but thank you. That was a very informative conversation. I appreciate the call. New York Bobby in Yonkers. Hey, Bobby, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Congressman Khanna spoke earlier about ICBMs and how they're of limited strategic value. The same can be said about the entirety of the U.S. Air Force. It's a failed strategic experiment. It was done after World War II because at the time it was thought that strategic bombing campaigns against Germany and Japan were much more valuable than they turned out to be.
Was this when the Army Air Corps was split out?
Yes, the Army Air Corps was split. I think it was in 1948. I might be a couple of years off on that. Yeah. But and they basically made it into another bureaucracy. And, this shows the ridiculousness of the Space Force, too, which is another bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah.
So the Navy and the Marines, and I know this is going to anger a lot of Air Force guys, do just as good a job at tactical air, and oftentimes a better job with less money.
Oh, your naval pilots are legendary, but they fly off aircraft carriers. They've got to be damn good pilots.
And they do a much better job, certainly with supporting ground troops, which is what the Air Force really should be doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's really time that we look at totally changing the way we look at defense.
Yeah.
And
I'm with you.
Maybe going back to the way things were. All right. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Bobby. Bobby and Yonkers. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth to multinationals with Willie Riley you didn't know all about. And welcome back. Deborah in Denver. Hey, Deborah, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. My husband came up with a really good idea for a solution for the Supreme Court judges, and I want to run it by you, okay?
Sure.
Mitch McConnell said that the Republicans will not approve any of Biden's judges if they take the Senate in 2022, as you know. What if Biden and the Senate Democrats pre-approve judges right now before 2022? And let me explain. If the Republicans after 2022, if the Republicans take the Senate, it wouldn't be a problem. Biden just appoints the pre-approved judges whenever there's an opening. The Constitution says that the president nominates, the Senate approves, and the president appoints. It doesn't say that you have to wait until a vacancy opens up to nominate and approve. It doesn't say that you can't pre-approve. What do you think about that?
That's fascinating. I don't know, Deborah. It's the first I've ever heard of it. I'd never thought of it before. I think it's brilliant. Whether it's practical or not, obviously it's completely inconsistent with the way things are done right now. But the question that you're posing is, is the way that things are being done right now, cast in stone by law, or is it merely tradition, I suppose? And
do you think it would even out the playing field as far as being more fair instead of the Republicans taking advantage and doing things, unfairly and unethically and just obstructing all the time?
My guess would be that the response that the lawsuit that would end up before the Supreme Court would say essentially that by pre-approving judges, let's say you pre-approved a judge a year or 2 years in advance to push the example to its extreme, and then the judge comes up for nomination, and the president says, "Oh, this judge is already pre-approved. I'm just going to slot him in." And then Congress would say, or the Senate would say, our obligation to provide advice and to also give consent to this judge is no longer viable because circumstances have changed. The judge has since been arrested for some crime, or the judge has changed his public positions or her public positions on something, or the judge just last week ruled on a case that causes us to all think that this judge is nuts. And so our advice and consent has been denied us. And I'm guessing that the Supreme Court would go along with that argument. I mean, that's the only argument that I can come up with against it.
But it doesn't violate the Constitution. So wouldn't they have to abide by the Constitution? And
no, they have
that.
They have to abide by whatever the Supreme Court says the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. I mean, this is the outcome of the Marbury decision in 1803, this idea of judicial review. So the Constitution says advise and consent. If that is disrupted by the advice being given in advance, and then a different Congress says, no, we disagree with this, I think that's where it would blow up. My guess, I'm very skeptical of it, Deborah, but I think it's a great idea. I would love to run it by a legal scholar. I am not one. I'm more of a reporter in these areas. So,
talk about it on your other show if they think it's a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. It's a great. I appreciate the suggestion, and tip of the hat to you and to your husband. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In our special video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, the one today is for anybody who has any connection, or for this week, anybody who has any connection with the military or anybody in the military who might still think that Donald Trump is a good guy. And I'm going through, like, I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40, 50 individual data points of times when Trump has trashed our troops, when Trump has deported troops, when Trump has deported military spouses who aren't citizens, when Trump has lied to our troops, when Trump has, specifically pulled money from our troops. I mean, he took money out of military housing, which is in some parts of the country, mold infested and really in a crisis, to build his border wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for. As just one example. So there's a whole list of these things in that new video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, especially for anybody you know who has any consideration or concern at all for our U.S. military. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday, and Mark in Northbrook, Illinois. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
A long-time listener. Hi, Tom.
Thank you, Mark.
The real quick question I had is, with the states investigating mass corruption and treason from the Trump administration, like Georgia with the election interference, or New York with the finances, or maybe D.C. with the insurrection, what is the federal government doing? Have you heard anything like the IRS or the DOJ or FBI? Are they just closed doors? Just a general question.
Yeah, Mark, I don't know the answer to that question specifically, and I'm not sure that anybody does. My understanding is that the FBI is looking into a number of things, but let's keep in mind Chris Wray, who Trump put at the head of the FBI, and who now we've learned in the last 24 hours, deep-sixed 4,500 tips about Brett Kavanaugh. He's still running the FBI. So if he's looking into things that happened while he was FBI director that got swept under the rug, like all this stuff about Kavanaugh, I don't have a whole lot of faith in how that's going to play out. But that would be the place. I mean, the Department of Justice would be where most of this stuff would start. The others would be in the individual departments, where you've got cabinet heads, the Department of Transportation, the EPA, the Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. There were 5 different inspectors general in those among cabinet departments, where they recommended to the Trump Justice Department, to Bill Barr, that these cabinet officers be prosecuted, 5 of them, and they were referred for criminal prosecution. And in every single case, Bill Barr said, not going to look at it. So whether any of that's being followed up on or not now, I don't have any idea, Mark. But inquiring minds want to know. I share your curiosity. Thanks for the call. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, I just wonder, when I hear about EVs, I hear love of capitalism. I mean, it's long been established that the train is much more efficient and economical than the automobile, or more carbon neutral than jet flight. Yet we don't have bullet trains, we don't have monorails, we don't have more trains going all over the place. We've got people driving 2 hours a day each way to work, big houses. I only crossed the threshold where we have to undo our love of capitalism and start having real solutions to climate change.
Yeah, I'll
let you answer.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, David, and I think that it is Well, actually, you know, the infrastructure legislation that the Democrats are talking about right now contains a lot of money for rail, for light rail, for buses, you know, for all kinds of public transportation. And that's really vital and important stuff, because you're right. We're driving all these, you know, single passenger cars all over the place, and it's not a good thing for this country. It's not a good thing for the world. So Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. I was listening last Tuesday to a very disturbing piece off the BBC, which broadcasts, as you may know, on NPR in this locality anyway. Mm-hmm. And the BBC guy was interviewing a gentleman in Afghanistan who has worked with our Navy SEALs for the last 5 years.
I heard that.
And the SEAL, yeah, good. Well,
but
you
finish telling the story for listeners who didn't hear it.
Yeah, I want the listeners to hear this. This is very important. This man worked with the Navy SEALs for 5 years. The SEALs admit freely that he saved their lives on several occasions, and he is not being allowed. The State Department has a program that is supposed to, in theory, facilitate people like this man getting out of the country alive. He has been told by the Taliban that he is going to be tortured to death. Not a quick bullet to the head, tortured to death. And I'm sure this goes not just for this guy, but for a lot of Afghans who worked with us during our 20-year war in that country. And the State Department supposedly has a program that's going to facilitate getting these people out of Afghanistan. It is not working. It is not happening. And I'm pretty sure you've got the usual bureaucratic, arrogant, bureaucratic misfeasance that the State Department is famous for. And if Joe Biden doesn't get on this, I can tell you we're going to see a bunch of people come to a very bad end, people who helped us out in our 20-year war, and the fascists, a.k.a. Republicans, are going to blame it on Joe Biden and every other Democrat in sight. It is going to be a real debacle, and people need to contact the White House via the White House email. You can just go to Google and do White House contact and send an email. I've also sent emails to my two senators, Merkley and Wyden, and my Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Yeah. People need to get active on this.
I share your concerns, Zeke. Vote Vets is very, very active with this as well, and there are other organizations that are on it. And it looks like the Biden administration is starting to move, but we need to keep up the pressure. Zeke, thank you. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? Really? Seriously? The Supreme Court said that? Are you kidding? Today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America
and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I share the concern of an earlier caller about the new districts about to be drawn, gerrymandered on steroids. And I hope that you can clarify my understanding of the way things might go forward. I understand that the recess is going to begin soon, like August 6th or something. Congress goes on vacation until, or goes out of D.C. until September. Mm-hmm. And is there any way that we can, as citizens, tell them, don't take your leave this time because we need to get the John Lewis bill and the SB 1 passed so that the gerrymandering won't take place in August. Also, my understanding, again, is maybe incorrect, but that the legislators and senators only work, they go in Tuesday morning, and they leave Thursday morning. So they're only working 3 days a week?
They leave Thursday night. It depends on who's running the Congress and when. I'm not sure exactly how it's running right now. I know certainly when the Republicans were running Congress, that was the case for the House. I'm not sure about the Senate. The Senate, Mitch McConnell, when he was just running an assembly line for right-wing judges, when he was running the Senate, he blew up the summer recess. They did not go into recess during August. Instead, they just passed 3 or 4 judges every single day. And and there's a lot of people who are saying and this is Chuck Schumer's decision. There's a lot of people who are trying to lobby Chuck Schumer to not have a summer recess for the Senate, and whether he's going to go along with that. My personal sense of it is that at the senior levels, at the Chuck Schumer level, and particularly with people like Dianne Feinstein, that there is not this sense of urgency, and I think that they are so misplaced in their confidence that American institutions will withstand continuing, assaults by the Republicans. But
can I make?
Go ahead.
Make one more observation. The other day when they took the vote on the infrastructure bill and it did not pass, it was 51 against it. So I thought, well, there's 50 Republicans. Who's the one Democrat that voted no with the Republicans? And it was Schumer.
But it's not because he was trying to block it. The only reason is that if he had voted for it, he wouldn't have been able to bring it back to the floor again.
But doesn't that seem like the Sinema and Manchin are kind of pushing him around?
Yeah, but they, they're the swing votes. I mean, he literally has to have a consensus. He has to have every single vote, which makes it very, very difficult. So, Lynn, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Brian in Sequim, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I really appreciate your putting the emphasis on running out of time and the lackadaisical attitude that some of the Democrats have. Comity is dead, and we don't seem to recognize this. All of the things that we've been talking about, the sustainable energy, progressive programs, they're great, but they're all going to become irrelevant if we do not hold on to Congress. All I like to say is I don't understand. No, I do understand Joe Biden. I know that he comes from a different era, and I do appreciate his outlook, but he's not responding in a positive manner to this. he continues to dally with the Republicans over details. And
I know his talking about how wonderful Rob Portman was the other day on that town hall meeting with Don Lemon was just deplorable.
It's a hard thing to come to terms with. You know, I've lost friends over the past few years because of our respective paths in terms of our philosophies and points of view. We cannot go on in this matter. You know, I think sometimes that maybe part of our response and the reason that we, say, for instance, haven't charged anyone with sedition, even though that book has written itself. It's obvious what people were doing. They've even said so. Maybe the idea is, well, we don't want to draw any hard lines that we're going to alienate people further. Forget it. They're already there. They're done.
No, the right-wing billionaires who now own the Republican Party are absolutely in take no prisoner mode, and they have been, you know, for solidly for 20 years and arguably for 40 years. And
I was watching.
Go ahead.
I was watching MSNBC the other night, and on comes a commercial for Newsmax. Newsmax. You know, all the people who don't like Fox anymore, they've defected to Newsmax. There was a poll done that said people who listen to Newsmax are twice as likely to refuse to be vaccinated. This is what's going on. People don't want to face the reality, and especially our leadership. They keep talking about brokering, negotiating, all the rest of this, when what they should be doing is putting the facts in front of their members and the leadership and saying, no.
Yeah, they should have been doing what Mitch McConnell did, you know, when he ran the Senate, which is just saying, we're going to get stuff done. We're going to get our stuff done, and we don't give a damn whether you guys want to go along with it or whether you like it or whether you don't like it or whatever. Thank you for the call. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, my apologies again for jumping down your throat a week or three ago.
Hey.
It was just a terrible day.
Don't worry about it. I love you, Tom. I love you, Tom. And you were in a hot situation that day, and it's just one of them things.
Yeah. So what's up, Randy?
I have trouble getting my point across sometimes. So the point is today, this morning on MSNBC, Stephanie Ruhl's show, there was a guy, Stanley Druckenmiller, who was lobbying Joe Manchin and on the stimulus. And he was afraid of overheating the economy and inflation and creating a bubble. And when he said the bubble, my thoughts were, we're already in this bubble. And we're $27 trillion in debt because we've borrowed money for wars, we've borrowed money for tax cuts, we've borrowed money for all of this stuff. And there's only two ways that this can go. If it doesn't float, it crashes, like you have been, your analysis and others. I can't remember his name, the guy on it. But and the other way is to grow our way out of it. Now, a guy's going to we need to get a handle on the inflation. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Democrats are not coming out and saying that this stimulus or that the infrastructure bill and all this stuff, it is to grow our way out and create a larger economic base.
Yeah, this is why I don't watch that show any longer, because these neoliberals keep popping up on it, and I've found that Jim and Poppy over on CNN do a much better job. But in any case, this is a right-wing talking point. You know, oh my God, look out, inflation is coming, and it's going to overheat the economy and all this kind of stuff. When we have so much debt, we have $22 trillion national debt. Of that, about $6 or $7 trillion of it is money that we owe ourselves. For example, you've got $3 trillion from the Social Security Trust Fund that's parked in treasuries. So, our actual national debt is around $15 trillion that has to be eventually paid back, and which is substantially less as a share of GDP than our national debt was in 1945 after World War II. After World War II, we were at 121% of GDP. And what Eisenhower did is he borrowed an additional 5 to 10% of GDP. He actually increased the national debt in 1953, 1954, and used that money to build a national highway system. And that national highway system so stimulated the economy that by the end of his presidency, just 8 years, by the end of the Eisenhower presidency in 1960, the national debt was down to around 55, 60% of GDP, something like that. In fact, it might have been lower than that. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. So you're exactly right, Randy. And that needs to be how the Democrats need to be positioning this, is we are going to grow our way out of debt. We are going to grow our way out of inflation. We're going to grow our way out of poverty, frankly, and we're going to grow our way out of increasing global warming by replacing the fossil fuel-based infrastructure with the renewable infrastructure. It's just what we have to do. Randy, thank you. Excellent point. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the rest of us. And welcome back. Marco in Los Angeles. Hey, Marco, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is something a fellow said about Afghanistan. The fact is there's a way to create our way out of Afghanistan without just deserting them, which is what we did in Vietnam, what we've done everywhere. So there is a way to do it. Now, the thing I'm calling about is...
What is the way?
The way is the majority, the reason a lot of countries are there is for their poppy fields. It's the heroin, capital of the world, and those poor farmers there don't get anything. The way to do it is for the world to say, if you will shift your crop from poppies to garlic, we, the world, will help you to build all this garlic farming and spread it around the world, and their economy, their base income can be
we tried that during the Clinton administration. We tried basically paying off all the opium farmers. It didn't and that was to deal with the drug problem. It wasn't to deal with, this is pre 9/11.
Right. See, this would be an economic boom.
Opium is so profitable. It's just like, because it's illegal, it's just so profitable. But anyhow, that's not okay. Okay, so you called about something else.
Everyone who calls and all the people, your guests, the Congress people and everybody, we're working off of a 1790s constitutional vehicle, and everybody's attempting to make that work in the 21st century. Well, in the 20th century, it doesn't work anymore, what they have. And what they did to get out of what they had with the Articles of Confederation, it wasn't working. They gleaned what worked out of the Articles of Confederation, put it into the 1790s Constitution. We need to do the same thing. Take the value out of our Constitution, 1790s Constitution, bring it into the 21st century. Restart, reform. It's exactly what Thomas Paine said to do. Reformation.
Yeah, and Thomas Jefferson, who said that every generation should reinvent the Constitution. I don't disagree with you. Here's the problem. It's just like when somebody says, oh, why don't we have world peace? Let's have a world government. And then you think back to how Adolf Hitler said, yes, we're going to have a world government. We're going to have 1,000 years of peace, and I'm going to be the guy in charge.
Creativity. We can use the District of Columbia to start newly with a brand new constitution because they're not a state.
But see, there's a group of billionaires who are trying to do that as we speak. The conventionofstates.com, I believe, is the website. If you just plug Convention of States into a search engine, it'll pop right up. They have been doing annual events in Washington, D.C., where they bring representatives from all 50 states to Washington, D.C. to practice rewriting the Constitution, holding an Article 5 Constitutional Convention to open the entire Constitution up and rewrite the whole thing. And they've got all their proposals for it and how they're going to rewrite every section, and they're going to completely reinvent the Constitution so that the United States of America no longer has Social Security, no longer has Medicare.
No. I said you glean what is valuable, just like they did with the Articles of Confederation.
This is what the Koch network says they're doing.
No, but they're not doing that. We need to do it. We, the people, need to do it, not them.
Yeah, well, good luck with that, Marco, because the Supreme Court has said that the billionaires have the last say.
But what I'm talking about is the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction with what I'm talking about. It's starting over.
No,
I'm
saying is that because we have such an almost complete capture of our political system by these right-wing billionaires, they are literally planning on doing what you're describing, except that they want to do it with their idea of what a utopian constitution would be. And I don't disagree with you that we need to have a modern-day constitution, but it's a dangerous road, Marco. Check out a Convention of States. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we have a new video for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about curing type 1 diabetes, which is a pretty amazing thing. Type 1 diabetes is where the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin are actually destroyed. They're gone. Type 1 diabetics, typically it shows up in childhood, and without insulin, people die from it fairly young. With insulin, they can live a good long life, but a University of Alberta researcher, Dr. James Shapiro, back in 1990 pioneered a transplant system. Now, the problem with that was that people had to use immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives because they had just gotten, a partial pancreas transplant from another person. But now he's successfully on mice worked out a way of actually curing type 1 diabetes. We can't do it legally here in the United States, but they're doing it in Canada. It's amazing. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Harry in Lovelock, Nevada. Hey, Harry, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I'm a longtime listener of yours, and I seem to recall back in the 1980s when I was listening to you, you were in Europe during the Chernobyl crisis. Am I right?
I was. Yes, I flew into Germany on May 7th, just a few days after Chernobyl melted down, and then we moved to Germany at the end of June of that same year. So, yeah, we were very much there.
Yeah, the question is, I think you were saying at the time you were using a scanner to scan for radioactivity in your food. Have you since taken any precautions in, like, not buying any pasta from Italy where they use wheat from the steppes, from downwind of Chernobyl in Ukraine?
I have not. I have the old Geiger counter that was made at the farm in Somerville, Tennessee. I have that old one that I had when I was in Germany, and I also have a newer one that's much more sensitive and fancier. And I've, on a couple of occasions, pulled them out and run through everything in my refrigerator and my cupboards and stuff, and around my house and around my yard just to see, because that was one of the things Chernobyl did, is it spit these particles. And I'm not finding any evidence of any kind of radiation, here in Portland or in D.C. when we lived there. I had them with me there too. So, I think we're good, Harry.
That's a relief. With Fukushima dumping, and they're going to dump even more of that radioactive water they've been storing into the Pacific. You mentioned the other day you're eating salmon, and I was wondering if you were concerned about that.
I have looked at, we eat fish, Louise and I eat fish maybe once or twice a month, and so it's pretty rare. But when there is, I have tested it, and I've never been able to find any radiation. But, we don't eat like the tunas, the big fish that migrate from coast to coast and that might be carrying things. We don't get into. So I just, I don't know. But I think it's not a problem anymore. Harry, thanks for the call. Courtney in Sherman Oaks, California. Hey, Courtney, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom, I'm so excited. I've been waiting for a reason to call you. First, I wanted to say it's amazing how you thread the line because there are some people with some really far out ideas, and you always seem to really still listen to them with respect, but you also make very clear about your ideology and how you see the world. But the reason I'm calling is because of this idea of a wasted vote. I've always voted Democrat except for my first election, which was Perot. I was young, idealistic, 18. But after Biden's speech, I think a week ago in Philadelphia, where he talked about voting rights, I was holding my breath waiting for him to say about the filibuster.
I know.
I was so upset. And I tweet with, you have to have you have to have a good filter for Twitter. But anyway, I tweeted and I got my most tweets back about forget it, let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to vote for progressive no matter what. I'm tired of this. And I got the most retweets and likes ever. And I want to know your opinion on this, but most of the retweets were like, we're with you, we're tired of this. And I understand Schumer and all of the, levers that have to go on. I understand that it's not easy and maybe impossible, which is my question. But most of my retweets were in favor. Like, yeah, we're tired. I only got a few that were like, you're not serious, you're irresponsible, which I understand too. At the end of it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to still vote for them because I don't want to be under the rule of Republicans. What do you say about this wasted vote idea at this point?
It depends on the election, and it depends on the time, and it depends on where you are. There are, for example, in 2000, I've told the story a million times. I voted for Ralph Nader in 2000 because I lived in Vermont, and I knew that it wouldn't matter, and I wanted his voice, and I wanted the Green Party to have a higher profile in American politics. Today, I would not do that. Although here in Oregon, it wouldn't be that much of a crisis. But it just depends on where you are.
And I'm in California, but okay, so discernment.
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
If you were living in Wisconsin, it would be a completely different thing, or in Michigan, or in Missouri, or a state that could go either way. Then the partisan dimension of politics becomes so much more important. Courtney, I want to try and get one more call in here before the end of the hour. Thank you very much for the call. Gary in Chicago. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Well, this call is about climate change rapture. The reason evangelicals are half-hearted, lukewarm about climate change because they think it's not their problem. Okay, they were going to be raptured. They weren't going to go through tribulation. But a quick trip to YouTube/climate change, it shows ultra-dramatic climate change events. We're in tribulation. There's no pre-tribulation rapture happening. There's no good Christians going to heaven and leaving only bad people behind. It's time for them to, follow their own teachings. Genesis 1:28, be good stewards of the planet. Yeah. Revelation 11.
I got it. Gary, you said it very well. Thank you. And special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabbermocky, Jay LeBlanc, Connor Arroyo, and Carne Verde, the folks who helped make this program work. And thank you to all of you, to all of them, and thank you to you for participating in our program, for letting our sponsors know that you're listening, for letting our stations that are listener-supported, for helping them out. Thank you so much, and have a great and blessed weekend. Get out there, get active, tag you're it. Be good to yourself and the people around you, too. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.